This video is going to link up to the September 30th class and is going to be a fairly basic introduction to tidycensus. Really just using a simple example to show kind of how the script works, with a preloaded script I've written for you, and I want you to sort of run, and we'll walk through each of the elements of it and then sort of see what comes out. As a quick reminder and caveat, I'm going to teach this in a fairly basic way right now. I use R largely for the easy gathering of census data, as we'll see here, and as well as for some work if I need to open and quickly clean really sort of large tables, but certainly more of a skill I've learned as I've gotten a little bit older and not necessarily as perfectly intuitive as I might be in ArcPro or ArcGIS or Python or some other things. So try to be as thorough as possible. If there's any explanations that might leave you wanting, you'll notice on the script that I have put together to work through here, there are a number of sort of good additional reading resources I would suggest you go to. So in order to do this, I'm going to suggest you open RStudio, which you should have installed. And as with most things that I've sort of recommended with RStudio, I want you to start by creating a project, right? And the project is sort of up here with the Create Project little green plus sign. And again, as a reminder, why we're doing this is because, a project effectively just kind of creates a housing folder that acts as the directory for which your script will easily read files and data and output files and data that you create. And think of this really as just sort of taking out a step where you might have to type in the very specific file path from your computer, c.users.whatever, blah, 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 blah. So I've just found it in my learning of R to be a really good, fluid, practice, especially when you're, sort of a beginner or, an early intermediate. So come on in here, create new directory, new project. The one thing here that will probably be different for yours might not say as a subdirectory. I just think this is useful for Mac users, I've noticed, because like a later step, when I end this video, we will bring the product of what we've created into ArcPro, and I found that if you just sort of default to the baseline here, it sort of puts it in one of those sections of your Mac partition, right? If you're using Parallels, that for lack of a better word, your computer has trouble finding in Catalog. So I always sort of browse and I make it a subdirectory in Desktop for this example so I can easily see it. But you could make it a subdirectory of like a master R folder or a master GIS folder or whatnot. So for this, we'll just call it, 23rd, census demo. It's a long name, Shay, but we'll go with it. So all that's going to sort of change here is it's developing my project. My window remains the same. I've got these two things that are eventually going to start to populate that we'll pay attention to, right? Your sort of environment here, which is effectively when I start creating objects in R, like tables or views, they're going to load here. It's not a perfect simile, but think of this like your layer window, right? In ArcPro, it's where sort of the objects, the tables, the things you can analyze will start to sort of show. If you think of it like that, then think of files more as your catalog, right? So I've created a folder, that if I were to go to my desktop and find, there it is, September 23rd census demo. And right now all it has is this, meaning that there's a project that if this ever closes or gets away, I would click on this and would reopen my project. But what's kind of neat is that eventually that connection here, right, your files, which is previewing loading files that are in there, is going to be able to read the many things that we create. And also, to start, it's how we will read our scripts, right? So a really good practice, if you're going to write a script from scratch, you might come up here and hit plus, and you'll create a new file and start a new script. And you can just start writing it from scratch. And I certainly encourage those of you, once you have worked off of the script I'm going to teach you, try writing your own using the one I've written you as sort of a guide. But to start, I want you to take that sort of tidy census demo, the no key script that I've given you, and I want you to sort of load it from your downloads or wherever you saved it into the folder on desktop. And you'll notice, like right when I load it, pay attention to this sort of files tab over here in R, because right when I load it, there it goes, it showed up, right? So it's iteratively reading that I can now access this. And so that'll be our next step. We're just going to come over here to this file, open an existing file, and we're going to say, there you are, right? Tidy census, it's in my September 23rd census demo thing. We're going to open it, and there we go. So before we start running through this, a quick just reminder of sort of formatting of all these windows that you're going to see, as well as sort of the way the script is written. So up here, it's going to show up as a series of tabs, are really any object or any script that I'm visualizing or viewing in R, right? So this is the way I'm looking at data I create here, or files that I load, or in this instance, the script that I'm working off of. I am going to iteratively run down this script, and using this key here, run, right? Run each row. And each time I run them, you're going to see in the console down here, that's where it's going to message me about how I've done, right? It's going to tell me, if my thing was successful, if packages were loaded. It's going to tell me what variables and functions are available to me. It might visualize some data down there, and it'll tell me if I've sort of tripped up and made an error, right? So you can always go back if there's an error and try to fix a line. You don't have to run through the entire script as one thing. Final two things to realize, they're sort of empty-ish now, but these two windows will start populating, right? Throughout this script, once I deal with the kind of operational / administrative steps I have to do in the beginning to make sure I'm good to go to grab data from the census, these things here, I'm actually start creating and pulling tabular data and then writing it as a shapefile and a table to be read in Excel. And once I start doing that, these things will start to populate. Cool? All right, so the only other thing to keep in mind, right, when I actually work through this script, I'm really only going to be talking about and running the lines that are sort of black and blue, right? So that's actually the code. And again, I'm sure some of you watching this are pretty detailed in R, have some familiarity. So perhaps I'm covering old ground here, but I think it's good to sort of remind. So I'll look at these black and blue, which are the commands. That's what I'll run. But spread throughout, because I know some of you will be learning this for the first time and might want a resource, I've tried to do a lot of annotations. So similar to Python or other scripting languages, if you have a if you have a hashtag, number symbol at the start, that means like annotation. So that's where you sort of write things. So what I've tried to do is be as thorough as possible, right? To spread resources you can look at for more information throughout, and more importantly, give you a sense of like what I'm doing in each subsequent big section and why I'm doing it. Cool? All right, so if we start by going down, the first steps you're going to do, if you guys have already done this, right? If you've already, for your quantitative methods class or in your own life, already installed these packages, then you don't need to do this, right? You can skip right to the library step, which is what I'm going to do. But if you haven't done these, what you need to do is sort of install the packages to your computer. And effectively what this means is that each of these things, tidycensus, tidyverse, dplyr, which I'm loading for best practices, but I'm not really going to use it in this script, and then SF, are all, think about them as sort of like manuals, books of instructions in a library, and they each come with verbs and nouns and functions and things that let you do cool stuff, right? By loading tidycensus, it's going to give me a series of functions, a series of verbs, a series of words that I can use to grab census data automatically from the web. Tidyverse is going to give me a way to really quickly and cleanly organize that data. dplyr, if I were doing it, would be the one to give me those sort of 5 verbs, that I'll cover in sort of another video and in class. Mutate, select, and so on and so forth, filter to allow you to be able to quickly summarize and analyze your data. And SF, which is a sort of simple function that's going to let me create a simple feature, which I can then easily export as a shapefile. So if you've never done this before, you got to do these lines first. Once you do them once, you never have to write these again into your script. So I'm just including them here as best practice. So what I would want you to do is you want to click at the end of each one, right? The end of each, and go up and hit run. So you do run, 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 right? And information would start to populate down here. Once all of those run and you follow the various instructions that I've given you here, you then call them. Now, again, if this is the second time you've run this, or you've already installed these packages, this would no longer be necessary and you could jump right to here. But library is always necessary. And effectively, think about that as like you're checking out a book, right? You're checking out a manual. You're checking out instructions. You're checking out instructions for Argidal, for Tidyverse, for tidycensus, for dplyr, for SF, all the things we installed here. By checking them out, you bring into your R environment right now the ability to call very specific words that will let you do things like grab a table, change a table, export a shapefile, so on and so forth. In order to do these, right, you go to the end and you hit run. And notice when I start doing this, it's telling me, right, what it's done. I'm going to run tidyverse. Tidyverse is loaded. Right, I'm going to do tidycensus, run. Tidycensus has been loaded. I'm going to do dplyr. dplyr has been loaded. I'm going to do SF. SF has been loaded. So effectively what I've done here is given myself a series of new words, right? New verbs, new functions that I'm able to use here later on. So we're almost done the administrative section. The last piece you need to do is actually get your census API key, which is effectively like a long digit code that lets the census website know that you're a trusted computer gathering sort of data from it automatically. I'm not going to write my key in here, but what you would need to do is run these 2 sets of your script right here. So you would go follow these instructions to get your key here. And then once you get it, you would copy and paste it where it says insert key here. You'd come here and hit run. And then you'd come here and hit run again on the reenviron, which will help sort of reload it each time you run this script. Your call, you can keep census API key, that line in this script or any script you use, right? I know when I'm learning how to code for the first time, it's always helpful to have like a script someone makes for me and then I build off of it rather than starting from scratch. So if that's sort of you can feel free to keep this here. But once you've registered the key, shouldn't be any issues or a problem. You shouldn't have to run it again, right? So you can run the environment if you want. There you go. We'll call my registry. So that's going to bring us down to here, right? So I've sort of changed the formatting. You can see now we're getting into like these 5 key steps that I'm going to go through. Like I said, I'm going to talk to the black and blue text, but the annotations are going to cover really 5 key steps that I've tried to sort of quickly and cleanly label throughout. You are going to load the variables you can actually get from the census. And this will be important, right? Because though our brains want to just be like, show me the non-Hispanic black population, show me the total population over 20, that's not how the census works, right? We have to call very specific names and you need to educate yourself on what those are. Similarly with geography, like we're going to say like, I want Philadelphia, or I want Pennsylvania, but we have to call them in a very specific way. We have to sort of call their codes the way that they're stored or it's going to trip up. So similar, we maybe want to view what those codes are and understand the specific names of specific geographies we can call. There's sort of a third step, which is a bit optional, but good practice. We'll have to do what we do in this third step eventually, no matter what. but I find sometimes it can be helpful to do it up front. And that's really sort of like once we figured out the variables we want, let's like set them into what's called a vector, best thought of as a list, so I can easily call them later. This is just a helpful step if you're going to pull multiple variables at the same time. Then we go to probably the most important, which is I'm actually going to get the data, right? So this will be the single most important call in this whole script. And this is where I go and interface with the Census API, and I grab either data from the American Community Survey or the decennial census. I stipulate whether it's going to be a census tract or whatnot, what the variables are, what the year, and I grab it to my computer. And finally, I output it, right? Either as a comma-separated value, a shapefile, or I'll make reference to that there's any number of other things you can output it as, but for our purposes, it's going to be a shapefile or a CSV. So the first thing is we need to load the variables to visualize them. So this call right here, right, this sort of v19, equals load variables. A couple things, right, as a reminder. This sort of, less than and a minus sign approximates an equals. So I'm setting a variable. And all I'm doing here is creating something that I'm going to call v19, but you could call cheese or dinosaur or shoe. It doesn't matter. It's a variable name. I'm building something so that I can store something in R that I can view later to understand what variables are available to me. And notice the moment I run this, where it says environment is empty over here, is no longer going to be empty, but rather v19, or if you had named it cheese, it would be called cheese. And I can go here and run this view if I want, or I could just click on v19, this data object. But either way, what it's going to do is create a new tab for me up here, v19. And here is where I can see the 27,000 different variables that I can call. I will not be with you the majority of the time, right? So really what you need to be able to do here, or what you need to sort of start doing, is you want to get into filter, right? And this is where you start looking at things like maybe you want median income, right? And it pulls all the median incomes things. You'd sort of browse, total median income would be that code. Or maybe you have another, which is, tenure, which is rent. Oh, where's my tenure? Yeah, see, that's the challenge, is some of these can be difficult to find. Even me, I don't even sort of remember what the names are all the time. But maybe I search commute, and it tells me sort of like the means of transportation and how they get there. Point is, this is something that you're just going to learn in your careers as you move through what it means to be a planner, or a demographer, or someone who works with data, what the various sort of call names are. But really what you're looking for is this name, right? This code. That's why we're creating v19 or cheese or whatever you call it, because we are eventually going to look at those variables down the road and plug them in. There's another sort of resource that I'd given you here. Census Reporter is another cool area if you want to sort of browse in a little greater detail. It's a little neater organization than the view here if you want to sort of see what variables are available to you. Okay, so on to the step 2. If variables is sort of like the information I can get from the census, population, race, blah, 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 blah. This is what lets me know the geographies I can analyze, so census tract or block group or block or state or zip code tabulation area or county or whatever it might be, right? You can look at sort of these Walker, data sets that I've provided throughout as links if you want to get a sense of the different variables that you can call. But if you actually want to see their names, right, because you'll see later on down the road that if we stipulate we want tract, which means census tract or block group, it's still going to want to know where. Do we want that for the whole U.S.? Is this for Philly County? Is this for a state? And so I found that when you run these two things right here, these two lines, FIPS codes and view, notice we're creating a value prop here, or sort of a value object. And then if we do view, it's going to sort of move it up into a data thing that I can view. And bing, bada, boom, right? I've got all the things. That's a state code. It's a county code. I can start to see the way I would kind of call different states and different counties. This is just helpful because, like, if I wanted to call something from Philadelphia, this helps me know that, like, what I'm calling actually, and I'll search Philadelphia, is Philadelphia County, and, right, the state code would need to be PA. So again, it's similar to this variable view where I can see the variables, I can see the various geographies, I can keep checking back with both of them. So once I've done that, I'm on to sort of the third step, which is optional. Really all I'm doing in this step, and I'll make a call to this specifically when I get to the next one. The next step of this, which is where I'm going to use something called get ACS or get decennial, is what I'll actually use to grab and gather the data. There's a step in there that asks you for the various variables. Now you may be pulling stuff one at a time, right? You may just grab total population, you may just grab, black population, you may just grab median income, which case this is probably superfluous, right? You'll just enter it in down there. But often you're going to be using this to grab multiple pieces or multiple variables at once. And so what you can do is create your own variable, right, that I've named ACS 2019, but you could name cheese, right, or whatever it is. And I've set it equal to C comma, right? C comma just creates what's called a vector in R. You could think of it like a list. So it's just saying like C parenthesis, all the other values I'm gonna want. And you notice that I'm doing this in two ways. I'm calling the different variables, right, that I want, that I found in the view. But in the same line, I'm renaming them. And that's nice, right? That just makes the data cleaner so that it doesn't come back to me as B01001, and I'm like, what the heck is that? But I'm naming it total pop, or population, or Asian population, right? Or black population, or cheese, or whatever the heck you want to call them. It doesn't matter. Just follow this naming convention. What you want the field to show up as equals the variable that you want to call, right? So we'll run that here. It tells me that I've created something. And now we get to the meat, right? Starting here, the single most important part of this call, right? I've got some information for you to read back, some nice resources, but this is where we're gonna run get ACS or get decennial. Get ACS will read the American Community Survey. Get decennial will read the 10-year census. There are a lot of inputs you could potentially use, right? And sort of the get ACS and the get decennial are really good resources where you can sort of see the various inputs you would have. The ones I've included here are fairly basic and fairly common. Geography, variables, state, county, survey, year, output, and geometry are probably the most common ones you're going to use. Here is what this sentence reads like outside of R. I would like you to get me the census variables that I stored above in something called ACS 2019. There we go. This is that point I was making earlier that if you didn't do this, you could just say variables equals tote pop this, right? You could write it in here as well. It's just much smoother to store them all up here and call them later. So I want you to get me the variables, census variables I stored earlier. I'd like you to bring it to me at the level of the tract, right? The census tract. Again, those Walker resources, FIPS code, or not the FIPS codes, but those Walker resources that you'll sort of see spread throughout, like up here, will help you get a good sense of, what language you can use, tract, block group, block, so on and so forth. So bring me the variables that I loaded for myself at the level of the census tract. And don't give me all the census tracts in the U.S., give me all in the state of Pennsylvania and more particularly in the county of Philadelphia County, right? If I didn't have this information, right, I could preclude county and I could preclude state and it's going to give me all of the census tracts. I could preclude county and it would give me the state of PA, right? So you can mix and match those as you want. So my variables that I asked for at the census tract level for the state of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia County, I want them to be the American Community Survey 5-year, right? You could do ACS 1. If you were calling decennial, you might say, SF1, the main table. You'll get more familiar with what the different table names are as you advance throughout your planning careers, or again, you could check some of these nice resources here for what's available. I want it at the year 2019, and I want it as what's called a wide output. This is one I would almost always recommend you use. Wide output can best be thought of where it will translate each census tract becomes a row, right? A record that goes up and down, and the columns become the variables. And finally, a critical step, geometry equals T. What that basically means is I'm creating a holding mechanism so that later on I've attached geometries already. You don't have to do a join in ArcGIS. This is a beautiful step right here, right? We learned last week how to do tabular joins. We learned how to do VLOOKUPs in Excel. Often we do that when we're joining census or other data to a known geography. But this is cool. It creates like an automatic join here. And later when you actually write this data, you can just snap your fingers and create a shapefile that has all of this information. So hit run. Again, it's going to say it does it. And notice, bing, bada, boom, there's that thing I created, Philly 2019. I can click on it and see this is what I'm building, something with these fields, right? A GeoID, a name, and look at that, the fields that I have. Now it's going to create a couple. Some end with E, some end with M. You're only going to see the EM distinction when you are working with American Community Survey data, because it's not a true full survey of the whole population. It's a sample. So this is estimate, and then that's margin of error, just so you're aware. So again, I've got them in R, right? Solid users of R, who want to employ some of the stuff we'll learn with the dplyr package in another video, the mutates and selects and filters. You can start doing that right away to this, right? If you wanted to sort of play around and screw with the fields here before taking it into your final product, bing, bada, boom, you could do it. But really where I want to do next is we've created our object, we gather our data. I want to do the rest of my stuff maybe in ArcPro. I would come down to these sort of last two steps here, write CSV and STWrite. And you don't have to do both of these. You could just choose one, or, like I mentioned, you could do some Googling and find other outputs in GeoPackages, GeoJSONs, whatever. But these two here really will translate that Philly 2019, that census data I gathered from the Census API. And this one will save it as a CSV, and this one as a shapefile. Notice the only two arguments we really need here are the first one, right? Philly 2019 is like, hey, where's the data object you created that I'm pulling this from? Well, hey, we created it right here. And then comma, what am I saving it as? And this is one of those benefits of using the project, right, that I teed up way back in the beginning of this video. Because of the project, all we've got to do is put the name.csv or the name.shape, and it's going to immediately store it in this sort of folder that we have. So I'll come right here and I'll hit run. Notice now the shapefile, the CSV loads itself here. I'll do the same thing with the shapefile. Run, and you'll see all the shapes go there, right? And here we go. Now I can actually go into my Finder, and I could open the CSV that I've created, and now I've got it in Excel. You could go back to all of our sort of Excel videos and start messing around with this. Or more important for what our purposes were today, I could come in here for ArcPro. I could refresh my desktop, which is where I'm storing stuff. Find that folder, whose name I have forgotten, which is September 23rd Census Demo. So I go back in, and there it is, that beautiful shapefile. It's not projected, as you'll see. We can use some of our techniques that we learned in the second week to, define and create a projection for this. But there it is, right? The shapefile at the tracked level with all of the attributes that I wanted pre-joined, right? So the other video for this week, talks about a more manual way to do this, right? And maybe you're never going to be comfortable using sort of R, and you want to just go to sort of data.census.gov, pull the tables, drag the table into Arc, do the join manually. That's no problem. That's your choice. But this is sort of a cleaner, more fluid way. You can start with sort of this basic script that I've written and expand it as you need by loading new variables and new stuff, and just try to make sort of a smoother way to gather data using the tidycensus package.